Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about the micro moments in your relationship that can feel like paper cuts, why relationships don't always end for the big reasons, increasing your self-awareness and practicing empathy, and how invalidating your person and their feelings is a fast track to either a shitty relationship or an ending. But before we jump into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
I had a couple of really good career wins in this last week.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and as part of that, I had my very first flight in over a year.
How exciting.
Yeah, back in the business lounge, baby.
Yeah.
So that's probably it. I kicked a couple of career goals. I got some really great feedback, and I also got some really constructive feedback around a couple of things that I can improve on. So feedback is fuel.
That's it. Yeah.
What about you, Nath? What fueled you up this past week?
Catching up with some friends who I hadn't seen for a really long time. So I had a really long lunch over the weekend, and
We had the longest long lunch.
yeah, it was long, wasn't it? Like 7+ hours.
It was longer than a normal work day. It was longer than an employee-safe work day.
Yeah, that's it. It was long, but it was great. Yeah, I was having a good time. But yeah, caught up with some friends, a couple of my groomsmen and their partners. And yeah, we just realized that we hadn't been in the same place at the same time, like the six of us, for about 5 years or something. So it's a little bit
Wild.
yeah, truly wild. So yeah, had a really great catch up, and yeah, it was just a really nice opportunity to spend some quality time with them.
Do you know what else filled me up?
What's that?
We had a really nice date night.
Oh yeah, we did.
Yeah, you organised us to do some of the Vivid Walk, so the light installation festival that's on in the city of Sydney at the moment. And we just had a really nice evening together, walking around, taking in the art and the installation, having some chats. We had a little sleepover.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was really
Snuggling
nice.
up together to stay warm. Was pretty freezing, but yeah, it was really nice. But now, here's this week's guest.
Today we've got Matthew Fray joining us. He's a relationship coach, writer, and author of the new book, This Is How Your Marriage Ends, a hopeful approach to saving relationships. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic Times, the Sunday Times in London, the Financial Times, and Daily Mail. He's based in Cleveland, Ohio in the US, and is the father of a 13-year-old son. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's pretty cool to be here.
Oh, it's awesome to have you.
Hey, so Nath and I have read your book and we listened to it on Audible. So we kind of listened to a chapter, had a chat, listened to a chapter, had a chat. But it's really interesting because you got curious about relationships after yours kind of crashed and burned. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the relationship space.
Yeah, I wasn't particularly interested in relationships at all. As might be evident, you having read the book, you might be able to just gather that. I didn't think about it in any sort of like mindful, intentional, proactive way. But what happened was when I was in my mid-20s, my fiance and I were married. We were 25 years old and didn't really know what we were getting into, I don't think. I think we just believed it was an extension of our dating relationship, which would have began around age 20, 21. And we had 9 years, most of which felt pretty good to me, but probably didn't feel very good to her. And the last sort of year and a half, 2 years were frankly pretty miserable. And then marriage ended, and not in like a legal sense, but in a we don't live together anymore sense, on April 1st, 2013. And that was more or less the most difficult day of my life. And I leveraged the awfulness of my marriage ending, my wife going away, and my son, who was 4 years old at the time, going away at least half the time, which was all sort of shocking and awful. And I don't mean shocking like unexpected, because again, our relationship had soured significantly at that point. But it's still shocking in like a physical, I didn't know this is what it felt like when it actually happens way. And I did the most cliche 34-year-old guy thing you could ever do. I just drank a lot and felt sorry for myself and sat around and waited for it to go away, and, it doesn't. And then finally, I got serious about doing some work. I was encouraged to start, quote unquote, writing my feelings. And they clearly met like in a journal, like a human being. But I kept drinking and I put it on the internet. And I thought I was going to tell like funny, like dating stories of being this like middle-aged dad that was like trying to navigate. I really did. I started the whole thing as a joke. The blog was called Must Be This Tall to Ride. And that's a nod to, I'm only 5'9". It was a nod to how like so many women were like auto rejecting me on height. Like I was very respectful of the like must be 6 foot, 6'2" thing. I wasn't going to do what I think a lot of guys do, which is
overinflate your height
or not respect the boundary. Because the truth is, I think people are allowed to be attracted to whatever they're attracted to. I don't think anybody owes me like liking me, but it was still like woefully depressing. And I'm like, this is really awful. Anyway, somewhere along the way, the collection of people actually paying attention and the feedback. And I just began at some point to tell authentically just vulnerable stories about the misery, so to speak, I was feeling at the time, and some of my reflection on marriage and on divorce. And I don't know, people got it. People were like, wow, this sounds like my life. Whether they were going through divorce, whether they anticipated it, or whether the stories about my marriage that I was now sort of like remembering and talking about as maybe being part of the chain of events that resulted in my marriage ending, me sort of learning to take responsibility for some of those things. It just struck a chord with enough people where an audience formed. And I took really seriously the idea of not being some jerk off that was writing like sardonic dating stories and just being like more white noise on the internet. And I'm like, I have an opportunity here to do something that matters and to genuinely try to help people avoid the same situation that I'm in right now. And that is truly when like it began. And I got really serious about learning because people were paying attention. And I'm like, okay, so it felt almost like a moral responsibility.
Yeah.
It's like the words that I put out there, and I'm still a huge child, obviously, as you know, because you read the book. Thank you so much for doing that. But I didn't want to be like on the negative side. You know what I mean? I wasn't gonna write stories about how like I was the victim and woe is me and it was all her fault. The work had to be, what did I have to give? Like what more did I have to evolve my understanding of or do differently? Undoubtedly, she was imperfect as a human being, but that wasn't going to be very useful. And I think a lot of people at the end of a relationship do a lot of finger pointing and not a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah. So how did you start that self-reflection journey? Like, because obviously you mentioned that when you started writing this, you didn't really think that it was going to be about your relationship in the past. And you also mentioned, I guess, that when your relationship was breaking down, it was just a horrible time and you didn't really have that self-reflection at that point in time either. So how did you kind of get to that point to be able to reframe the relationship and how the relationship broke down?
Honestly, it was, I think you just have to encounter the right person or the right piece of content. For me, it was a book called How to Improve Your Marriage Without Talking About It, which is a bit of a misnomer of a title because I don't remember them saying literally not communicating is some path to happy relationships. So I think the title's a bit misleading. But what I remember specifically, I haven't read it in a long time. What I remember specifically the book doing was illustrating very common conflict patterns in relationships, describing what a husband's motivation versus what his wife's motivation might be in heteronormative relationships. And it sounded so eerily familiar to me that I had the moment that a lot of people tell me I give them now, which I'm super flattered about. It's that, holy shit, I'm not alone. Somebody gets it. Like somebody understands exactly what this looks and feels like. And it's a really hopeful experience when you don't think, because when your relationship sucks and everything's miserable, it tends to not be a thing that you run around and tell all your friends and family about. You don't sit around talking to coworkers about it. You know, you maybe have like the one like person that you confide in or something, but this is not polite conversation. This isn't the stuff you bring up at parties and during dinner conversations. So we keep it to ourselves and we hide it and we hold it down and we think we're weird and freaks and we're the only ones and that there's something broken within us because it seems like everyone else is getting along just fine. So how can it be that my wife and I are suffering so much? The truth is everybody has these moments of disconnection and these conflict patterns in their relationships. And it's not as if the absence of conflict exists somewhere. It always exists to a certain extent. It's our capacity to repair and to reconnect over and over again is the difference between the people who make it and the people who don't. And I had no frame of reference for that back then. But the holy shit, somebody gets me thing was like this life-changing moment.
Yeah.
It really, really was. And so to have that feedback today from people that are like, wow, it's like you have a camera in our kitchen or our living room, because that sounds exactly like what our marriage sounds like. And I'm so happy to give that to somebody that maybe never experienced it before, because people think they're broken and
unique, special snowflakes, and their problems are totally unique to them, and nobody could ever be experiencing what they're experiencing.
And it's scary when you're in that situation. It's like a lonely place to be, because it's like, who the hell do I talk to about it? And, you know, they're the same people that like won't go to a therapist or a counselor. They're the same people that don't, you know, I wouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Going to marriage counseling was not on my to-do list.
Yeah. Matt, I'm so glad you shared that, because this is actually one of the reasons that we started the show and our Business Fuel Collective to help couples proactively add fuel to their relationship, was because when I found out that one of my best friends in the whole world, like I was in her wedding, was calling it quits with her husband, I was so blindsided, because I had no idea that one of my best friends in the whole world had been in so much pain for so long. I didn't know that their relationship was shitty. I didn't know that they'd been struggling. I didn't know that any of this was going on. And I felt like a really shitty friend. And I did a lot of like self-reflection on that. I was like, well, why do I feel like that I hadn't created a safe place for her to share what was going on in her life? And it made me realize that we have to show up in all of our relationships with more vulnerability. And it was a look in the mirror kind of moment and went, well, how open and honest am I about the relationship that I have with my husband? And when Nathan and I have like turbulence, how open am I about sharing that? And I realized that it's not enough. The answer was not enough.
I mean, that's really interesting. And I was wondering, as you were telling the story, if your friend perceived you guys to have such a happy, vibrant, together relationship as I did with many of my friends, that it was like too ashamed to say it to anybody, because it's like these guys have it so together. And I mean, one way to do it is to humbly like ask how, and then maybe you learn that it's not as perfect as it might appear. But for me, and I don't know, and maybe there's certainly some gender related things. I always want to emphasize that I don't think it's biological. I don't think by virtue of being male that I'm a certain way. I think it's common for boys to be raised a certain way. And then they grow up lacking certain relational skills that I think are very useful in like adult romantic relationships and probably all relationships. And at least where I'm from, girls, young women were brought up with relational skills that I think on average, not always, but on average, that I think serve healthy adult relationships. And they needed those in order to succeed growing up, to find friends and acceptance and things like that. And the boys just didn't. We got along just fine, calling each other names and hitting each other in the shoulder. Still best of friends, you know, like everything was great. So it was fascinating, like the depths of sort of blindness and ignorance that I realized after the fact that I had.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you looked around our high school today and you scanned what children or teenagers were doing in their breaks, you see groups of girls sitting in circles talking, and you see boys on the oval playing some sort of game with a ball, or in the music room jamming their guitars. Like teenagers, even then, like we're building friendships based on talking and nurturing, and guys are building their relationships around common interests and doing things.
Yeah, no, that's brilliantly insightful and exactly what all of my school year experiences looked like. Yeah, girls standing around in small groups and us being idiots.
Yeah. So, Matt, I read one of your blogs, and it's called She Divorced Me Because I Left Dishes by the Sink. And you published it in 2016. And I know that this blog was a bit of a game changer for you. Can you tell us a couple of tweets length, like what's this article about?
Yeah, the She Divorced Me Because I Left Dishes by the Sink post was the first thing that caught wildfire, like sort of digitally. And it reached enough people where it elevated me from semi-anonymous blogger to person people turn to as a thought leader, so to speak, for thought leadership on relationship stuff. And I didn't feel all the way ready for that. But what that article was, I'd already written, I think, better ones, but with just less clickable titles, I guess.
Yeah.
But I describe it as my affinity for metaphor. I told all sorts of stories before and after that one about these sort of isolated things that I can remember, whether there was one incident or whether it was a common theme in our relationship. And that shows up and it just seems kind of regular, kind of vanilla, kind of benign, kind of not a big deal. But I think that they're really common in your average relationship. You see it all the time. And this conversation around the dish by the sink was so popular. I think it still remains that today whenever people are exposed to it for the first time. It causes so much debate. What it does, I think, is it serves as a model or a framework for having the conversation about what is allowed to matter to somebody else. And people get really distracted by the literal dish by the sink thing, which I'm happy to clear up for you guys, by the way, because I've been really annoyed with everybody that thinks it's such a literal conversation. And by everybody, I mean the small vocal minority of angry guys who also leave dishes by the sink, who feel as if their feelings and their opinions are every bit as valid as their wives and their shared home lives together, which, by the way, I totally agree. Their opinions and their feelings are equally valid. That's not the conversation I'm having. The conversation I'm having is about whether my wife is allowed to feel pain, to feel disrespect, to feel an absence of love and care because I deliberately do something, leave a piece of evidence that says, I'm going to choose what I think and what I feel over what you think and what you feel. And I don't really give a shit how you feel about it. And I don't really give a shit what you communicate because my brain simply can't accept that this dish by the sink is as big of a deal as you're making it out to be. And I think that is perhaps the most critical, poignant, important lesson for relationship health is that people don't have to be in relationships if they don't want to. And I invite people to live a quasi-selfish life of singledom. It's a perfectly fine way to live. I think it maybe lacks some substance and it probably feels lonely in our 70s and 80s if we're fortunate enough to make it that long. But it's fine. I don't make any judgment about it at all. But if we're going to, as statistically most people do, share a life with somebody, you better get really serious about treating what matters to someone else, even if your brain's like, that's stupid. Like, why do they care so much about that stupid thing? Which is more or less what I brought to the table for my 9-year marriage, my 12, 13-year relationship. Was like that all of the time, anytime she and I disagreed about something. And I realized at the end, I was judging her thoughts and feelings to be inferior to mine. But not literally. I promise you, I didn't try to like lord my thoughts and feelings over her. It was the math result, though, of the conversation. It was the math result of my decision-making process. It was at the end of the day, I wasn't convinced that dish mattered as much as she said. And so I left it there. But in real life, it's predominantly metaphor. I did not leave dirty dishes with a bunch of like shit on it that I didn't rinse off. That is not what it was. I left one drinking glass. It's still there. I live in the same house. It's still there by the sink. I fill it up with water every morning and I take like supplements, like vitamins and things like that, like medicine, whatever. And I just do that every day. And I don't want to like get it out of the dishwasher. And here's the difference. People might say, oh, this guy hasn't learned anything. He still leaves it by the sink. What a dick. Maybe I might still be like a dick, but I promise you, if I lived with a human being who would walk into that kitchen, see that glass and feel pain from it, feel disrespect, it would never happen, ever. You know what I mean? I take very seriously the responsibility of not leaving evidence. It can be a dish by the sink. It can be the position we leave the toilet seat. It can be the state with which we leave the bathroom after we shower or brush our teeth or whatever it is we do in life. Anything, truly. Everybody's going to have their own version. I talked to somebody yesterday, leaving shoes on and walking through the house just really mattered to his wife. But he just like, I don't really care. I leave my shoes on and like I walk around sometimes and it really frustrates her. It's just, everybody's got a different thing. And I had 7. The dish by the sink is just the one that got really popular. I guess there's a lot of dishes being left by sinks out there. And I'd have no way to know. But anyway, I just think that's a really important conversation for people to be thinking about and having with one another.
Oh, absolutely. And in the book, you dive a little bit deeper into this, and you do kind of bring up that this is a trait that is often shown in men. So why do you think it is that men do seem to invalidate a lot of concerns of women?
I think that question might be a little bit above my pay grade. Seriously, because I truly think there's psychologists out there and sociologists that have studied this, and I don't like to make accusations. I think that there might be a tiny bit of sexism. I think there might be a tiny bit of sexism in there. I don't mean gross sexism. When I say gross sexism, I mean the idea of power and dominance, and I think I'm better than somebody else, because I don't think most people do that. I know that there's some people that do that, but I also don't think they're dangerous. Like, that person. A person that mistreats others in an overt way. I don't find overtly harmful behavior to be a very dangerous thing, because it's to me, it's a siren, it's an alarm, it's a flashing light. It is obvious to people who value personal safety and personal wellness to stay clear of somebody that does overtly harmful things. My mission is to make people aware, to encourage people to pay attention to these things that hurt us and our blind spots, these really, really tiny infractions, like a dish by the sink, which isn't even an infraction. In theory, I could be married to somebody that likes that glass being there too, in which case it would not be harmful to the relationship. So it's not about the value of like any given thing. It's about tailoring our awareness and our consideration for and our respect for and our love for another human, and just tailoring what we do and say to their values, to their boundaries, to their needs. And I just didn't know how to see that in my 20s. Even in my early 30s, I didn't know. I'm 43 today, for context, for anybody listening. And when I was married from age 25 to 33, 34, I just didn't have that sort of like wherewithal back then.
Yeah, Matt, I heard you talk I don't know if it was in the book or one of your blogs, around this idea of the really big marriage crimes like infidelity or cheating, or, those really big things that you think are the reasons why relationships end. And then you sort of contrast it with like, no, that's not really the reason. There's a million small little moments that layer up on top of one another to create marriage crimes or relationship crimes that are really doing as much or more damage than some of those big things. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Absolutely. I often talk about the idea that my wife and I bled out from 10,000 paper cuts. It wasn't anything big and dramatic. It was just a series of like tiny wounds, and they sneak up on you, because I just think the critical idea is any one of these isolated incidents, any one of these conversations is easily dismissed as not a big deal. And it's true. Any single one of them isn't a big deal. I like to quote Simon Sinek. I can't say quote because I won't get it correct, but entrepreneur, business coach, Simon Sinek, great author, brilliant man. He, and I talk about him in the book a little bit because I loved this analogy. He says, if all you do to take care of your teeth is brush your teeth for 2 minutes, one time, like that doesn't do anything. Your teeth will fall out. And he says, brushing your teeth for 2 minutes twice a day doesn't do anything, unless you brush your teeth every day for 2 minutes, twice a day. And that's everything. That's the difference between, and this can be a negative thing, this can be a positive thing. This idea of being very mindful of like doing things consistently. Unfortunately, I had a lack of awareness about how things I was doing consistently, habitually, was sort of harming my relationship. We need to be aware of the tiny betrayals, of these like micro infractions that we do. I think it's the most dangerous thing. And the way that I kind of think about it almost is like the way that we breathe. And I love to like remind people we breathe 23,000 times per day. I don't believe there's any single thing, except possibly like something our brain does on autopilot, that we have done as human beings in our lifetime, mathematically a higher number of times than taking a breath. My gosh, what percentage of them were you conscious of? Were you like, did you pay attention to? Blinking too, it's the same thing. And we don't know, like, just because the vast majority of the time we're not paying attention. And so my work at the end of the day, not to sound like a yoga spiritualist or anything, but at the end of the day, it's like about mindfulness. It's about intentionality. It's about getting really serious that while we're busy operating on autopilot, other people may be experiencing harm. And it's usually not most people. It's usually just the people with whom we share our lives, with whom they intertwine. I basically just think about the people that live in like the same space that I do. It can be your roommates. It can be your spouse, your romantic partner, your children, whatever. They're the people where I think if you don't accept responsibility for how your actions sort of roll downhill and impact other people, your relationship will sour over time if you refuse to do that, unless you're just really lucky. Meaning, unless you just sort of lucked out and married somebody that also doesn't care about the dish by the sink. You know what I mean? Like, because that can happen. People can win like the personality type lottery, and then like everybody just never makes one another mad or sad or hurt. That just doesn't happen. But I think most people, most of the time, accidentally have the thing that happens where we hurt each other in these like really, really small ways. And the people who know how to repair that can make it forever. And the people like me who just deny that the hurt is as bad as the other person's claiming and that they need to get over it suffer those consequences. But they don't do it overnight. They do it 10 years later, 15 years later. And then that's when shit hits the fan, because that's when it hurts the most, because you've wasted, it feels like you haven't, but it feels like you've wasted so much of your life. Right. And you lose somebody and all this history and sometimes children. And then it can be a brutal thing.
Yeah. Matt, I know that your wife was communicating to you not just about the glass by the sink, but a whole range of other paper cut worthy things. And you just didn't really think that they mattered. And this is a really common thing that we've heard running the show, having conversations with couples and experts, that quite often it feels like the woman has spent a year, 2 years, 3 years waving flags saying, hey, this hurts. Hey, this hurts. Hey, this hurts. Hey, this hurts. And then when it comes to crunch time and that person says, I want to end this relationship, that person who's stereotypically been the male is like, I'm sorry, what? Like, where is this coming from? I'm so blindsided. I'm so confused. So we've had one guest in particular, Jo Schonheim. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to it, because Jo's story is really beautiful. And her transformation out of the end of her marriage has been amazing. But she kind of talked about that. And then we had a divorce lawyer on the show who said, yeah, it's really, really common that guys just aren't listening. They're not listening. They're not hearing. They're not seeing these flags. So talk to us a little bit about your experience of that time in your relationship, and maybe what do you wish you did differently?
Sure. I'm happy to do. That's the easy part. The what I wish I'd done differently. It's difficult to remember me back then. I'm so different, and I process things almost 180 degrees differently. I don't know. Have you guys, by any chance, ever watched the show Breaking Bad?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you like watch the series?
We did. Yeah. We were late adopters, so we didn't watch it too long ago.
And we watched the spin-off series as well and everything else. So.
But to this point, to what I just said about not remembering myself, I think this is like an important idea. When my marriage ended, I was like crying all the time and drinking and binge watching television. And the show, one of the 2 or 3 shows I binge watched was Breaking Bad. This was back in 2013. It was still on live TV, but I'd missed the first like 2 or 3 years of it. And I watched it. And I very specifically want to point out Walt and Skyler's dynamic, the husband and wife of the main characters. And back then, while I was busy feeling sorry for myself and watching that show for the first time, I was always sort of on Walt's side. I always thought Skyler was like not...
What a bitch.
Yeah, just being awful. And then I just watched it in the last, I don't know, like year and a half. And the number one takeaway for me, in addition to the show being incredible still, and that it's totally worth a rewatch, is that I saw and heard and understood how well written Skyler's character was, because it aligned so closely with like the work that I do today. And I was blown away by my like filter, the way that I'd processed her on nearly a decade earlier, right on the heels of my divorce, versus how I processed her now. I just thought that was really extraordinary. And so you ask me about like my relationship with my wife. The best I can tell you, the best way I know how to say it, is that she would communicate that something was wrong. And I just thought one of three things. And this will roll into this invalidation habit that I think so many people, often men in male-female relationships, have. I thought she was wrong, incorrect. I thought she was mistaken. I don't mean to sound, it's not even judgy, I promise. I didn't think she was dumb. She's brilliant. I just thought she was interpreting a situation inaccurately. And so she'd say this thing happened and she was saying she was feeling bad about it. I'm that's not even what happened, is one of the ways I responded. The most common way, I think, is I was so baffled by how something that seemed so minor to me could be hitting her so emotionally hard, which is version 2 of this invalidation thing that I think that we do. She'd say, Matt, this thing happened. I feel bad about it. And my brain would say, oh my God, why is she making such a big fuss about this stupid thing?
You thought you'd shot off a potato gun and she was interpreting it as a missile.
It was insane to me, right? I think I wrote in the book, I think I can quote this accurately, that I felt like the punishment never fit the crime with her. It was, the analogy I used was, it felt like she was charging me for murder when my crime was driving a tiny bit over the speed limit in a construction zone with a burnt out taillight that I didn't even know was burnt out. And I don't know what your traffic laws are there, but you can get a ticket for a burnt out taillight here. I didn't even know it was burnt out, officer, relax. And I was going 4 over the speed limit, settle down. And that's seriously how I reacted to her, because version 3 of the way that I would react to her when she said, hey, Matt, you did something and it hurt me, is I would defend myself. I mean, that is, I think, maybe the most common form of invalidating someone else. And I suggest to anybody listening, if they've never really thought about this before, when somebody says, I hurt, and your response is, you shouldn't hurt because of insert reason here, because you're misinterpreting what happened, or because your feelings are being a little hypersensitive right now, or regardless of those ideas, I was perfectly justified in doing what I did, so don't blame me. Don't make your hypersensitive emotions my problem. Let me explain to you why it was so smart for me to do what I did. You erode trust in that paper cut way every single time you have that conversation. And I think that is just about the most common conversation pattern in relationships, quote unquote, doomed to fail. And I don't mean to sound so cynical, because they're not doomed to fail if people become aware of it and stop doing that, but doomed to fail gone unchecked. I think the only possibilities are shitty relationship that lasts forever, or relationship that becomes shitty and then ends, are the two paths when one partner or both partners cannot successfully come to the other and say, something's happening that's hurting me, that's upsetting me, that's angering me, that's saddening me, that's frightening me, that's stressing me out. Whatever it is, I just like the word hurt because it's so easy to see pain. And then we don't show up to help. We're like, that's your problem. Your brain's wrong, your feelings are wrong, or regardless, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. The math of that conversation. So that's how I always responded to my wife, right? And I'd love to make this point. This is what she heard for the duration of, our 12, 13 years together. If I'm hurt and I go tell Matt about it, trying to recruit him to help me not hurt anymore, if he doesn't agree with some facet of this, or he doesn't think he did anything wrong, he will always choose what he thinks and what he feels over me. Always. So Matt will support me and love me when he and I are in agreement about something. But 100% of the time we're not in agreement. He will imply that I'm stupid, or I'm crazy, or I'm weak, that I'm treating him unfairly. And then if he's being defensive, he'll imply he's going to keep doing whatever he wants anyway. And that is the recipe for trust erosion in a relationship, or at least one of the really, really critical ingredients for trust erosion. And to me, that is the low-hanging opportunity for somebody to recognize in their own life and then very consciously, very intentionally eliminate from their conversation patterns and hopefully their thought patterns with their relationship partner. Because it's just not relevant whether I calculate the dish by the sink to be a big deal. What's relevant is that my wife's in pain. And if I don't show up for her in a way that communicates, I give a shit that you hurt, and I'm willing to participate differently moving forward in a way that will protect you from feeling that again, if that's not our response pattern, we lose people's trust over time. It will not happen overnight, and probably not even in a year or two, but it will in the 5, 10, 15, 20 years that people stay together. And that's how divorce sneaks up on you in your blind spot in year 15 with 2 kids.
So that's what you call this invalidation trifecta, yeah? So can you just recap those 3 things?
Yeah, happy to. And I'll try to be like more brief about it this time. My wife would come to me and say, Matt, something's wrong. I hurt. And version 1 was for me to challenge her story, for me to say, no, you're thinking about it the wrong way, or you interpreted it the wrong way. I'm going to correct what you're saying happened because you're mistaken. And the math result is your feelings don't matter because they're based on something that isn't real. Version 2, Matt, I feel bad because this thing happened. And I would say, okay, that's what happened, but why are you feeling that way about it? That's an overreaction. You're being hypersensitive right now. Here's a healthier way to feel about this thing that doesn't matter very much. And that's version 2. And I think these are really, really common habitual response patterns. Version 3 is simply to defend ourselves. Wife says, Matt, you did something, it hurt me. And my inclination is not to not to care at all about like what she's saying is going on in her head and chest right now. My priority is to defend my honor, is to defend my character, is to double down on the idea that everything I do is so right and virtuous at the expense of, her weak girl emotions, is more or less how that conversation tended to go. And it's the way you can love someone and mistreat them at the exact same time. That's what I did because I promise I loved my wife. I promise. I just failed to see how damaging and toxic that conversation pattern is.
Yeah. Matt, on that third point about defending your character and going to battle for who you believe that you were or that you are, I know that was quite a common theme in your book around like that good people can be bad at relationships and people with the best intentions in the world can still inadvertently harm their relationship partners. So talk to us a little bit about this idea of good people still fucking up.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really critical idea because because the motivation to defend is the core belief that I'm a good person. And when good people who love their relationship partner are not intending to cause harm, it doesn't compute that they should be hurt. I think that we crave the benefit of the doubt because it's like, I love you. I sacrifice more for you than anybody. And this thing's happening. And it seems like you're like making it the most negative, sort of cynical version possible. And the truth is, I don't think people who show up effectively in their relationships get that. I just think people like me do, who never validate, who never considered. And it's so important, I think, to detach a couple of ideas. Intention. Remy Pearson taught me this yesterday. She said it over and over again in our conversation. Intention does not equal experience. And the way that I think about it is it doesn't matter how decent, how good you are. It just doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter what your intentions are. On the other side of the equal sign can be something another human experience as harm. It just can happen. And that's fine. We don't actually have to accept any responsibility for that. I'm fine with somebody saying, I didn't intend to harm anybody. Therefore, I'm not going to feel persecuted by that person right now. That's fine. You can get away with that with virtually everybody in the world. Just probably not your marriage partner and probably not your children. And so I'd encourage people to think about like that. We don't necessarily, I don't think I personally in my personal life choose to. I want to accept responsibility for how the math result of my actions affects everybody I come into contact with. I never want to inadvertently harm people. And I want that to be my default setting moving forward because it was the absence of that destroyed the most beautiful thing in my life 9 years ago. And I take that really, really seriously today. And I want to extend it to all humans. But if you don't want to be that person, if you don't want to like accept that mantle of responsibility, I don't think that makes you a bad person. But I do think it makes you not trustworthy or reliable as a lifelong relationship partner, because that means you have to subject yourself to feeling hurt every single time there's a disagreement where you're being inconvenienced or disrespected or experiencing harm somehow. It's just not the way to live. And so I just encourage people, if they want to maintain a healthy relationship, we have to accept some level of responsibility for how the math result of our words and actions affects someone else. And the idea that helped me eliminate defensiveness, I'm still really defensive, let's be honest. The idea that helped the most, though, is this notion that very good, incredible humans can be very bad as a relationship partner. They can lack the necessary knowledge and skills to execute the function of relationship partner effectively. In the same way, the most incredible humans in world history, like Mother Teresa, probably sucked at like building a skyscraper or flying an airplane. She fed millions and millions of people and did an extraordinary good in this world. And she's one of the like most beautiful humans that's ever lived. But I bet she sucked a lot of stuff that's like technically difficult to do that she never studied before. And I just encourage people, men particularly, to consider that you can be an incredible human being and that it's possible that you're just not executing some facet of your relationship in a way that mathematically results in your partner not feeling harmed, or perhaps not feeling all the way loved, not all the way respected. And we can opt out of that process if we want and be defensive. And I think our lives will suck a little bit if we do that. It's a choice. I think our lives will be substantially healthier and better, and our relationships full of trust and intimacy when we do the extra step, the extra work of saying, I'm going to give a shit about that. And I'm going to very intentionally do things where the math result is she feels loved, she feels respected, she feels desired, she feels cared for. That was the work I didn't do in my marriage that I try really hard to do now, and that I try to help others do now.
Matt, we had a guy on the show, Bruce Sullivan, who had a very similar story where he had his first really big core relationship and it ended. And in his learning and reflection of that was like, I had all the intention in the world of being with that person forever and ever and ever. But my intentions didn't match my actions in the same way that I can intend to be the healthiest, most considered gym-going human. But if my intention to go to the gym at 6 a.m. and me actually hitting snooze and staying in bed, your intentions don't match your actions, and then you don't get the result of your intention. So that kind of feedback loop. And yeah, we can have all the intentions in the world. I'm sure that we all have a long list of things that we're intending to do at some point. But that's not really the life that we're creating, is it? We're creating the life off of what we actually do.
And while I love the analogy, I think it reinforces my point about the danger of the like hidden paper cuts, because I think most people understand in the year 2022 that if they eat poorly and if they don't go to the gym, there'll be negative health consequences, or at least they won't get where they want to be from a fitness standpoint. But I do understand your point about living your values, which was your point. Not necessarily the math results of the gym versus dieting versus like how your body transforms. But one of the things absent, I think, in relationships, particularly with younger people, certainly with me in my youth, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I invite everybody to like think about this for themselves, is I didn't know whatever the equivalent was of I had to eat certain foods, I had to do certain exercises at a certain like consistency or certain intensity in order to achieve a result. I didn't even have that framework. And I don't want to sound defensive and like I'm not responsible for my shitty relationship. I absolutely am responsible. But so many young people enter relationships ill-equipped, not necessarily through negligence on their part. They don't have a frame of reference for it. Because the truth is, if I hadn't gone through this process, I would have modeled shitty, invalidating, inconsiderate behavior for my son as he aged right now. He would now be 9 years later and witnessing these sort of like circular arguments that his mom and I would be having. I'd be modeling the worst, and who knows, like how he'd feel about it, how he'd think about it, how that would affect him emotionally, whose side he would take. Who the hell knows? But maybe he'd take mine, and that just secretly, he'd love his mother, but he might think I'm correct because I don't think I was necessarily wrong. I don't. I think I was harmful, meaning I don't think I was incorrect in like a math way. In our conversations, there are differences of opinion in a lot of cases, right? There are differences about preferences. And I want to say that too. Like, people aren't wrong. It's not really about right and wrong. It's not. It's about becoming aware of what happens after we say and do things. And that's why I like to talk about math. On the other side of the equal sign is the result of what happens next. And it's not really relevant what our intentions are. And it's not really relevant how correct we are about something. On the other side of the equal sign, if trust has eroded, if pain has been caused, and that is the consistent thing that occurs anytime there's like a teeny tiny bit of conflict in a relationship, I just think it's, again, I hate this word so ugly, but doomed to fail. Or again, be horrible in like year 10, 15, 20. it'd just be so miserable if that is always what happens. I think just so many relationships end before it ever gets to the like really, really ugly point because somebody hurts so much that they leave. And what's really interesting is it can be the me in the marriage. It can be the invalidator, the person that's not considerate. You do that enough times, your wife starts behaving differently. She starts emotionally protecting herself and not letting you in and not wanting to be intimate and not wanting to do things together. And that can feel like abandonment. That can feel like neglect. That can feel like she doesn't want to go to bed with me ever. So maybe I'll go hang out with the attractive lady in accounting at work who seems to think I'm great and laughs at my jokes. I mean, that's the rationale people use in their relationships. So you can be the person causing all the harm, feel totally justified in being like mistreated by the spouse that I believe is the more aggrieved, hurt party.
Yeah, flip the victim.
Yeah, and it's incredible the levels of like rationalization and justification we can do. And I don't think it's illogical. That's the thing. I don't mean to describe men that are gross and manipulative. I mean men that are hurt and confused that their marriages have fallen apart. And then we hear, right, about the sad, abandoned, angry wife that hasn't been touched or flirted with in 14 months, succumbing to the handsome guy that she works with or one of her old friends or something. And the same thing can happen. And then we all hear that story about them breaking up because one or both of them had an affair. And everybody was like, oh, yeah, an affair is why they broke up. But no, it's because one or both of them could not trust the other to like show up effectively when something hurt. And it might have been something as seemingly benign as a dish by the sink or the position of the toilet seat.
Yeah. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today and having this conversation. There are a couple of things that I would love to sort of round out on, but I wanted to echo what you said there about we don't have the skills. And a big part of why we started Fuel Collective was this idea that we watched a series of friends go through really messy breakups, separations, and in some cases, divorce. And when Nathan and I were inspecting that, we went, interesting. There's a pattern here that either one or sometimes both of the people in this relationship don't have a great blueprint to work from. They grew up in a home environment where a healthy, happy, thriving relationship wasn't necessarily modeled to them. Or if there was something modeled to them, maybe they're not that interested in recreating it. And when you've got one, sometimes two people who don't have a great blueprint and they've stepped out into the world, met one another, decided that they want to do life together, and they don't have a blueprint to create something amazing. Like, where do you go to learn that? We graduate our tertiary education and we go on to university or college or technical skills to go into our career and workplace, but we don't ever do that for our relationship skills. And we just, for some reason, have a belief that we should innately know how to do this, how to build a life with another person. And yet we've never been explicitly taught. So there's a big part of this idea of a fueled up life and a fueled up relationship. Like, what are you doing to add fuel back in? And sometimes that's that beautiful, fun, playful date. And other times it's leaning into a conversation that you maybe don't want to have, but you know that you need to for your future version of yourself. So I love so much of what you've shared. And one of the things that really resonated with me, and I believe that you wrote about in the book, was like, what is this costing us as a community, as a society, as a world, when so much time, money, energy, and resources is being expended on relationships that are in pain and relationships that are ending? So I'm on a big mission that if we all invest in our relationships, we're going to have better quality of life and in turn a better world. So thank you so much for flying the flag, being here with us today. But to round out, I would love to know, what are some of the things that you prescribe to couples to keep their relationship fueled up?
I appreciate that. As you know, brevity isn't my strong suit, but in my coaching work, I focus on the two ideas. The first one that I just introduced was this idea of invalidation. And if anybody's listening feels like they have that pattern in their life, there's a way to turn that around. And I don't necessarily think we have time to like all the way dive in on it, but care that someone's hurt, like someone's hurt, and address that more than our perception of whether they should or shouldn't be hurt. If we can do that, if we can choose the human being and the quality of our relationship over our perception that they're mistaken and our desire to like correct them, I mean, I just think that's like the super low hanging fruit in terms of we must be able to have successful conversations. When someone feels pain, they must trust their relationship partner, that they can go to them and say, hey, something's wrong. And that the other person's going to respond in a way that doesn't mathematically result in more pain and less trust. That to me is like easily like the lowest thing. But the second thing that I work on in coaching is just this idea of consideration. And it's where we started, the dish by the sink, essentially. The work of consideration is I calculate for my relationship partner when I make decisions, not sometimes, all of the time. I don't carelessly leave the toilet seat up, even though my wife or my girlfriend's perfectly capable of putting it down. It's not that she needs me to like exert my strength to put it down for her. She's great. She can do it herself if she wants. What I care about, what she cares about, is not walking into that room and finding evidence that I either thought of her and didn't give a shit and left it the way that I wanted to, or more commonly, that I didn't even think about her at all. That she wasn't even like a thing on my radar. She didn't matter enough. That's maybe why I left the toilet seat up, right? So many people defend themselves. It was an accident. I didn't know. I wasn't thinking about it. I'm sorry. The work is thinking about it. The work is not, I'm going to leave this glass here because that's what I want. Screw what she wants. The work is, this matters to her. It doesn't really matter to me. I mean, if it does, fine. Have a big values conversation about the glass by the sink. That's great. If somebody wants to. But in my case, the glass not being by the sink didn't cause me pain. And the glass being by the sink did cause my wife pain. And the work is like in our heads, in our hearts to a certain extent, because empathy. I don't want my wife to feel pain as a result of something that I'm doing or not doing. And that is the core, like personal value that I've changed in my life. And it's difficult to not to love somebody actively. That's not what I mean. When you don't have the mental habit of remembering to remember, that's the work. And we have to build the mental habit of, I have to protect people from the stuff I'm not thinking about, from the stuff I'm forgetting. And I just think, I know that might sound really nebulous and really weird, but it can be done. And it's so critical that we don't inadvertently leave evidence that we didn't even think about somebody, or that we did, and we just did whatever we wanted anyway. That's how we slowly destroy trust in our relationships with people.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an incredible conversation. And I know that you've got the book coming out in Australia. So we're looking forward to your ripple effect getting even bigger. But to say thank you for joining us today, we've given 7 days of training sessions to some young parents to impart some knowledge on child nutrition, immunizations, contraception, and family planning in India. This project is looked after by Academy of Root Development and was made possible via our partnership with Buy One, Give One. So thank you so much for making that possible.
Thank you guys for doing that work. It's incredible.
No worries. So Matt, if people want to connect with you or want to learn a little bit more about what you do or want to get your book or something like that, how can they do that?
Thank you so much for asking. My home on the internet is matthewfray.com. And from there, you can find all the things. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I just started a pretty low budget YouTube channel that only has like 7-8 videos on it. And then the book is This Is How Your Marriage Ends. It's available in North America and in the United Kingdom. And it's launching in Australia in June of 2022. And I'm really excited about it.
And if you want to get a copy now, you can jump onto Audible and get it anyway.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. If there's one last thing that you want to share, or an idea or a thought or a message you want to impart, what would it be?
Something that I didn't say that I say in the vast majority of these conversations is to prioritize trust, maybe even over love. I got so hung up on, I love my wife. She should organically like know this and feel this and give me the benefit of the doubt because of it. But what I didn't do was behave in a manner that mathematically resulted in trust being maintained in the relationship. And I think if people can learn to do two things, think about trust as the most important condition we have in order to achieve longevity in our relationship, and that the absence of trust or the erosion of trust is the thing that's likely to end us, then I think we can start having really mindful moments about the way we speak, about the way we act. And, you have to accept my paper cut analogies that we don't destroy trust by lying and cheating. We do, but that's not the most common way. We do it while we're busy not paying attention. And so trust, preserve it at all costs, and try to grow it all of the time by responding to the people that we love in a manner that they experience as being loved. instead of what we think they should interpret as love. It's just getting outside of ourselves and being more about another human being's experience. Empathy really is, like, in a word, the thing I needed to learn and practice.
Thank you.
Really love that.
Thank you guys both so much.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.